Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Middle Grade Self-Discovery. I'm Julia Smith, Senior Editor, Books for Youth. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click the Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Links to today's slide presentation were sent directly to you from Zoom at the start of the webinar, so you can download them at any time by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive a follow-up email containing links to today's slides presentation, certificate of completion, and video recording. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Kim Baker, author of The Water Bears, Mae Respicio, author of Any Day With You, Celesta Rimington, author of The Elephant's Girl, and M. Evan Wolkenstein, author of Turtle Boy. First, we'll hear from Kim Baker. Kim's first book, Pickle, has been selected for many reading lists and was a finalist for the CBC Children's Choice Book of the Year and the Texas Bluebonnet Award. Kim's second novel, The Water Bears, a thrilling caper for middle grade readers, published on April 21st of this year. When Kim was 13, she lived above an old movie theater and drove a rusty VW van for odd jobs. Now she and her family live in Seattle near beaches and tide pools, but usually far from bears. Visit her at kimbakerbooks.com. Welcome, Kim. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much. I am so honored to be here, and I'm excited for a chance to talk about books and stories again. It's been a while with the quarantine. The Water Bears is my second book. It's about 13-year-old Newton Gomez. He tries to recover from a bear attack and have a normal life, but he lives on this kind of eclectic island. The bear attack happens before the story even starts. It's about a year later, and now he's on this island with his family. There might be a lake monster. A bear statue washes up that they think might grant wishes. There's an imminent vaudeville festival, and his parents give him a taco truck to help him get around the island and drive since his leg is injured. It's my second book after Pickle, and I wanted to write something different. I wanted it to be a stretch, something more serious and personal. I don't think about themes when I'm drafting. I save it for revision typically, but middle grade is inherently about exploring who you are and where you're at, what you love, what you identify with, the things you appreciate. Kids this age, they like to try things on and build themselves with these different interests and attributes. So I thought, what's more inherently our true selves than what we love? I thought a lot about what young me loved about the world: animals, friends, family, stories, looking for treasure and magic. I was always doing that. I felt like there was an adventure just waiting for me. If I peeled back the layers of the world and I could find this treasure, I looked for old coins. I thought I would find a treasure map in a junk shop. I think it was probably the media when we were kids, Ghostbusters and Goonies and E.T. There could be an alien in my closet or a treasure map under the town. I always felt like there was a little more to the world, a little magic that was just out of reach. And I wanted to explore that in fiction. And it makes it easier to write if you're writing about what you love about the world. So I put in things that I've always loved or I love now, like tardigrades and baby goats, tide pools, and then more kind of abstract things like creative expression and hope. Most kids won't be attacked by a bear, thankfully, but we all have to go through something difficult, something hard, like we are right now. So The Water Bears is about a lot of fun things and finding your own definition of normal, but I wanted to bury a different kind of treasure map in there too, little instructions for how to face fears and find coping skills and resilience and get through hard times to come out on the other side. So that's it. So that's the Water Bears.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Mae Respicio. Mae is the author of the middle grade novels, The House That Lou Built, which is out now, Any Day With You, also recently published, and Everything Starts With Nothing, coming out in 2021. She is the past recipient of a PEN Emerging Voices Fellowship and has been a writer in residence at Hedgebrook and the Atlantic Center for the Arts. Her writing and photography have been published in places like Pregnancy Magazine, Working Mother Magazine, Patagonia, Pottery Barn Kids, and more. She has also worked with the Filipino American community of Los Angeles to edit the nonfiction book, Images of America, Filipinos in Los Angeles. Mae and her family live in the suburban wild of Northern California. Take it away, Mae.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I am really thankful for this chance to join you all today. I know we're still in such strange times, so to be able to connect with everyone and talk about these wonderful books and celebrate middle grade books feels very inspiring, so thank you. And just to warn you, if you hear two voices shouting for mom in the background, those are my kids, my boys at homeschool, and they promised to keep it quiet, so I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed. Okay, so Any Day With You. I'd like to give you just a quick synopsis, and then I'd love to share a little bit more about my inspiration for writing the story, and I think that will give you a sense of some of the book's themes. So this is a book that's all about a 12-year-old girl named Kaya. Kaya is a maker kid. She loves doing special effects makeup and just creating and expressing herself. And Kaya has a very beloved person in her life. It's her eccentric, jovial, storytelling 90-year-old great grandpa, and everybody calls him Tatang. Tatang is a Filipino word for grandfather. And Kaya's summer is suddenly turned upside down when Tatang announces that after living in the United States for many decades, he's deciding to move back to his homeland of the Philippines. And Kaya doesn't want him to go. You know, she's very upset. So she and her friends make a movie about the Filipino folklore that Tatang loves to tell. And they enter this movie into this huge citywide contest, thinking that if they win, it will stop her great grandpa from saying goodbye. So that's the story in a nutshell. This is a heart book for sure. It's bright, it's warm, it's loving. I like to think that it has a nice balance of both funny and tender moments. And ultimately it celebrates friendship and family and home. And then of course the theme of finding yourself. I've always been a writer who's taken from my own experiences. So this story has a lot of personal connections for me. It's set in the beach or along the beach in Southern California, which is where I lived for many years. It has a very fun and colorful taste of movie making, and I used to work in the film industry, so I brought some of that into the story. And it has kids who love to create, so there's this really fresh, fun spirit of creativity in the book. I mentioned my boys earlier. They are 10 and 12, and they love creating things, making things with their hands, and seeing their ideas come to life. And I was that kind of kid as well. So, you know, this book has lots of maker kids who are inspired and motivated to create. And then finally, probably my most personal inspiration comes from my own childhood, and it comes from the strong intergenerational relationships I had as a kid. I was lucky to be close to both sets of my grandparents and have their influence in my life. And the Filipino culture has very strong roots in oral storytelling. So I remember one of my favorite childhood traditions was when we'd have these big, loud, large family get-togethers, my cousins and I, and there were like thousands of us, or you know, I don't know, 30 of us, but my cousins and I, we would gather, and all of our grandparents and aunties and uncles would tell us their stories. And I have such fond memories of that. We would hear about everything from their life in the Philippines to their first moments of building their lives in a new country, to all of their folklore and ghost stories and superstitions. And so I tried to weave a little bit of that into the book as well. Last weekend was Memorial Day, and I was thinking a lot about one of my grandfathers. He was in World War II, and he was a survivor of the Bataan Death March. So I also grew up hearing all of his memories of what that time in his life was like. And so having those memories and those stories very close to me also inspired a little bit of Kaya's great grandpa's storyline. So there's a lot that I put into this book, hopefully that bring in rich layers, and much of it was inspired by, little blips from my own life and from my kids' lives. And then lastly, since we're talking about self-discovery, that I think is really the core of Any Day with You. It explores questions of what does it mean for your family's history to take root? And for a kid, how does that affect their lens of the world? Kaya is this very strong and smart girl who faces this sudden change in her life. But by the end, she learns to navigate this change, and she becomes more self-aware and resilient and more confident in what it means to stay true to yourself. So this definitely felt like a very meaningful book for me to write, and I hope that readers will come away feeling inspired and hopeful and just feeling really good after they spend some time with Kaya and her family. And that's it. And just now, my neighbor decided to start mowing his lawn really loudly, so I think I ended on a good note. So thank you.
Thanks, Mae. Up next is Celesta Rimington. Celesta has lived in nearly every region of the United States, and she spent her childhood discovering the delights of Nebraska sunsets, Wyoming rodeos, California beaches, and Alabama Southern cooking. Her enthusiasm for writing truly ignited when she was 10 years old and living in Tornado Alley, waiting out rainstorms and tornado sirens by writing short stories. Celesta holds a degree in sociology from Brigham Young University and is a graduate of the Institute of Children's Literature. She's a musical theater performer, an elephant advocate, and a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. She lives in the Rocky Mountains with her husband and 2 children, where they have a miniature railroad with a rideable steam train. Celesta loves to visit with students online and in schools. Visit her website, celestarimington.com, for more info. Thanks for joining us today, Celesta.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today. I want to start out by telling you about The Elephant's Girl, a little about the story, and then go into what inspired the story and a little bit from my life that led to writing it. First of all, The Elephant's Girl is about Lexington Willow, an orphan who grows up in a zoo with the zoo train engineer as her foster father. The train engineer found her in the elephant enclosure following a severe tornado, and she was rescued from the storm by an African elephant named Naya. Lex is able to communicate with the elephant in a special way, which you'll discover as you read the book. And because of her unusual beginnings of being swept away from her family by a tornado, she can also talk to the wind. In the story, the elephant's messages send Lexington and her best friend Fisher on a summer adventure involving a friendly ghost, a lost treasure, and uncovering the mystery of Lexington's past. Lexington has to navigate complex feelings about the family she can't remember and discover for herself, with the help of a great friend and positive adult role models, where she belongs and what family truly means. I think it's a book that will appeal to readers interested in adventure stories, mysteries, books with animals, baseball, friendship stories, and of course, stories of self-discovery. I like to think it has a balance between adventure with fun and with tender heart moments and special connections between the characters. The Elephant Scroll started out as an idea I had when I worked my first high school summer job at Omaha's Henry Doorly Zoo and Aquarium. Part of my job was to give the zoo train speech from the caboose of the Union Pacific train. I used to think what it would be like to be a kid who lived in a zoo and had behind the scenes access. And I thought, what if that kid had an amazing connection to one of the animals there and had friends who also lived in the zoo? As I wrote the story, I start with story and I start with setting and character. But as I worked on it, I considered why a child would live in a zoo, and I gradually began to draw on my own experience of wondering about family I had lost in my life. And I thought I could relate well to a character who didn't remember her family. I also thought about how a child like Lexington might be treated at school or might struggle to adapt to traditional school and how she'd respond to that. I found some great ideas to expand the story also as I researched elephants. The story didn't start out as a book about elephants, of course, but the research I did by connecting with scientists and talking to the elephant manager of an AZA accredited zoo, it definitely influenced much of the story. And since we're talking about self-discovery, I want to say that my hope is that middle grade readers will feel understood as they read about Lexington Willow, that they will know that they're not alone, that there will always be trusted adults to help them, that they can find friends and be friends like Lex and Fisher are to each other because it's a great friendship, and that they belong. I also hope that middle grade readers will feel inspired to know that they can make a difference, even at their age, to make the world a better place. They can overcome hard things and challenges, which I think is such a powerful message at any time, but especially as we navigate changes like we are right now. And then a little bit about what led me to this. When I was young, as Emily mentioned, I did grow up in an area where there are a lot of tornadoes, and I also had a complex family dynamic, and I moved around a lot in elementary school. One time, I believe it was in second grade, I went to 3 different elementary schools in 3 different states. So I relate strongly to that middle grade time of self-discovery, navigating friendships, and of wondering where you fit in a family and searching for belonging. So that's me and the Elephant Girl.
Thank you very much, Celesta. And now we'll hear from Evan Wolkenstein, who is a high school teacher and writer. He attended the University of Wisconsin in Madison, the Pardes Institute for Jewish Studies, and Hebrew University. His work can be found in Tablet Magazine and the Washington Post and on bimbam.com. He lives with his wife and daughter in the San Francisco Bay Area. Turtle Boy is his debut novel. The floor is yours, Evan.
Thank you. It's great to be here with 3 other incredible authors whose books I'm really enjoying. So Turtle Boy, this is a story on the one hand about an introvert, Will, who's taken some serious blows to his self-concept and his confidence. He looks a little bit different from other kids, but he doesn't like the way that he looks, so that the type of shaming that can happen in schools, it affects him profoundly. So he's somebody who's stuck in this imaginary prison or like a shell, right? And this is what happens when this Turtle Boy is matched with an unlikely friend, an extrovert who's actually unable to leave his physical circumstances. He happens to be in a hospital and he has serious needs. He has a bucket list that only Will can help him with, but which Will feels way beyond, that it's way out of his comfort zone. So it's a buddy story. And the best thing about buddy stories is how the 2 friends evolve. So on the other hand, every writer has their obsessions, and my obsession is transformation. And probably that owes to the fact that I had the condition and the surgery that Will has when I was an adolescent. And forever after, I've always been fascinated by what did and what didn't change as my appearance changed. But even more importantly, helping others to have the courage and the strength to stretch and evolve to the next level. That's what I see teaching being. I've been a teacher for 16 years. It's not the passing along of information, but it's mentoring and guiding my students' evolution, cognitive and social and emotional. So my book, no surprise, is a journey of self-discovery. Will's friend, a girl with a powerful fist, an unstoppable volleyball serve, and a bulletproof conscience, she needs to evolve as she confronts her own friends' fallibility and their imperfection. And that's a rocky road for her to go on, but she comes out on the other side. And Will's other friend, Max, he's kind of neuroatypical. And he confronts the fact that it's not his fault that he's so impulsive, but it's his responsibility to keep it in check and to clean up afterward. And even the so-called mean kids, they change as they discover that there's more going on in life and in the lives of kids that they torment than they previously imagined, and their eyes are opened. And I like that this book features kids with so many different personalities, boys and girls, with a huge range of interests, from herpetology to volleyball. And at the same time, kids are learning that adults can change and that they can be an influence on the adults around them. And meanwhile, adults are discovering that they can do more than they thought possible, or that they can discover that they're already giving it their all, and that they actually have to come to terms with powerlessness to save kids from their struggles. So I very much see this as a book that parents and kids can read together or at the same time, and hopefully open up some interesting conversations. And despite all the struggle that the book has, I believe that the book wraps up with light and hope, which I feel good about, because, you know, now more than ever, we need these things to make it day to day and month to month. You know, this story has been in me and part of me since I was 13. It took me 3 years to write it, but the book feels especially relevant in this post-COVID or COVID world we're living in now. Because as I see it, my students and, you know, kids all over the world they're dealing with these huge life changes. They have no control and they have to adapt. And like, you know, some kids are saying, I don't get to see my friends, and I've never been in this situation of isolation. Or I like being at home, but you know, I'm exhausted and all my efforts at school just aren't paying off in this new way. Things aren't working the way they used to, or you know, all year long, I look forward to summer and summer camps and hanging on to that. And now that's not happening. So I think kids are just feeling, you know, over their heads and out of control. And that's true for my characters too. So the book presents these models of how to weather storm. And sometimes it's pulling from your heritage. There's this strong message in the book about Judaism reflecting this idea of tikkun olam, of repair to the world, and mitzvot, of the way that we're commanded from our deepest selves to give back to others, to give back to the community. This idea of b'tselem Elohim, of seeing the dignity in every human being, even people who you see as different from you. And maybe most importantly, the discovery that your heritage, whatever it is, can offer you structure and inspiration and guidance, and it can challenge you even during uncertain times. And that you can find the rest of the strength you need to make it to the next level of your evolution from your friends and from the adults in your life, and last but not least, from somewhere deep within yourself. So a pleasure to get to share this this book with kids out there, and with parents and with adults who enjoy this fantastic genre, and hoping to keep this conversation going.
Great. So we will now open up the floor for a Q&A with Kim, Mae, Celesta, and Evan. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, feel free to enter them in the Q&A box, which you can open by clicking the Q&A icon in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to them either today or after the webinar by email. So let's get this going. Oh, there we all are. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
It's so nice to see faces. So I actually really liked one question that had already popped up in the Q&A, which I can't tell if someone already answered it, but for all of us, revolving around the themes of hope in middle grade literature, and like whether or not that's extra important right now as we're in the middle of a bigger crisis outside of any of the personal challenges people might face. Just if anyone wants to hop in and comment on that.
It kind of, I'll answer if that's okay. For me, it kind of dampens the blow of having a book coming out right now in these times because uh, like having a book with no bookstores and no libraries and no schools. And it's like, how do you launch a book that way? How do you promote
Mhm.
it? And I think having a, I didn't, obviously I didn't know this was going to happen when I was writing it, but it seems like a good book for these times. And that kind of helps me be a little bit more at peace with it. And I'm happy now that kids have access to these books about hope in these times. So that's how I feel about it.
Yes.
I agree, Kim. I feel very grateful that I was working on a heart story that was full of hope and feeling connection and feeling belonging and all of that. None of us could have known when we were writing our books and knowing when they were going to come out what was going to happen when our books were coming out. But I'm very grateful that this is the story I chose to work on and that it's coming out now because I do think it's so important for middle grade readers to have stories of hope and stories that help them see different ways that characters can solve their challenges and how they can do hard things and navigate change. And I think that fiction is so good at helping everyone, but especially children as they read, to learn those skills.
Definitely. All right. We good? Anyone else want to speak to that, or should we? All right. Guess we will go on to another. Some of you talked about this in your intros, but I just like to tease it out a little bit more since the theme of this webinar is self-discovery. And just, you know, what it is, how that's operating in your books and how it might guide the readers through that sort of journey.
I can go. So for me, when I think of self-discovery, I think of books that have a real emotional push to them. And it was interesting hearing about all of your wonderful stories. Is our stories are so different. You know, the kids in these books are in such different experiences, but there's just this emotional journey that I'm hearing when you describe your books. And for me, that's really what self-discovery is about, is there is a kid who is trying to figure out something in their little world or in their little community. And I know when I'm writing, I always aim for my characters to just be a little bit changed by the end of the book, whatever that means to that character, but changed by feeling emotions and going through more of an emotional journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would also add that middle grade literature, just by nature of the fact that it takes place at a period of time when our target readers are sort of neither here nor there. You know, they're in a transition period, and there's something beautiful about that because it's all about creativity and reinventing yourself and uncovering and discovery. All those are great. At the same time, it's so rocky and it's so bumpy and it's so terrifying that I sort of feel like books can, you know, there's that idea that books can be windows or they can be mirrors. And I'm thinking like the image I'm having is our books can also be like life rafts, that kids who are being swept along in this transition can find a character that they go, that's not me, but that's good enough for me to map onto and to hold on to that character and be swept along, and maybe find themselves on the other side feeling like they have a little bit more courage, a little bit more hope, or the reminder that they're not going through this alone.
Richard Peck said that he thought a middle grade book should end with a lot of life, feeling like a lot of life was left to be lived. And I really love that. Like it always ends on a note of hope, which is one of the best things about the category for me.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons I connected with writing middle grade so much. My experiences at that time period in my life live very vividly in my heart and my soul. And I just, every time I think of a story, that's where I go. It's just that time period that's so important for children to feel connection, to feel cared about, loved, to have some resources to look to when they're trying to figure things out. And yeah, I just really think that's what drew me to middle grade to write it.
Definitely. And so now you're putting those books out for today's kids, which is so awesome. Do you have any books that stand out in your mind that sort of served that purpose for you when you were in middle school?
Oh, definitely. I do. How about you, Mae?
Yeah, so my childhood was in the 80s and Judy Blume was my gal.
Yeah.
Everything about her books. And I just found out that Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is being made into a movie. Um, so it takes that long for a book to be made into a movie, I guess. But yeah, there was something about her books that just really touched my heart, and just watching these girls in their everyday lives going on a journey. And that's what I also aim for in my books. How about you all?
I read a lot of funny books as a kid. I read Judy Blume as well, like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing and Harriet the Spy. I really identified with the way she observed the world, which I bet a lot of middle grade writers can. Uh, Bunnicula, like a lot of fantasy, like the Chronicles of Narnia and things. And it was more kind of, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but it was like an escapism type of thing where that was what was inspiring me. I didn't get into more serious writing until high school and college, where I read more kind of not so happy, funny books, but they have a special place in my heart too. But my voice is definitely in middle grade. But at the time, I reached for those kind of situational. I think I read Tales of Fourth Grade Nothing and Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which is 50. I read. It's turning 50
This year.
Oh, wow.
Amazing. So resilient, that book. And I must have read each of those at least 20 times. Love Judy Blume.
I love Judy Blume as well. She was exactly what Evan was saying for me. She was a life raft, those books were. And I loved also reading books that were a little bit escapist. I loved the Chronicles of Narnia and the Prydain Chronicles with the Black Cauldron.
Yes.
I loved those.
Those were so great.
Yes, and I also love to read stories that were windows for me to other lives and people different from myself. I love to read Mildred D. Taylor. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry was a book I read several times in 5th grade. I don't know why, but I just really connected with that story in a way to feel like I wanted to know more about experiences different from mine, and historical fiction too. I loved historical fiction a lot. I think a little Irene Hunt maybe in there somewhere.
I'll jump in. This is a totally different type of answer. I didn't read much in middle school. I was a big reader as an elementary school kid. Middle school is not an easy time, and I think I was sort of putting up walls, and I was like, I don't have the headspace, already having been a reader, for more people's stories, for other people's stories. Although I did have The Karate Kid on VHS tape, and I would just watch it over and over again. So maybe that. And it wasn't until high school when we were reading more interesting books in my literature classes. I remember discovering Kurt Vonnegut, and I was like, now I'm back to reading. I'm ready for this again. But I think that for me, when I was writing Turtle Boy, I was like writing maybe the one book that I could have gotten through to me as a 7th grader through the defensive wall that I had up, and hopefully it might be able to do the same for others.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Oh, yes. So aside from like the personal revelations and developments, I feel like storytelling and middle grade to a large extent. Oh my goodness. Sorry for all the horns that just happened in my neighborhood. But I always find that empathy and imagination are sort of entwined in a certain way, and that they are definitely threaded through all of your stories, whether you intend it to be there or not. But I don't know, do you agree? Do you think that is something kids might be able to get from these stories?
Definitely.
The world, that's part of empathy.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, imagine there's no easier way to step into somebody else's shoes other than through a book. I mean, that's the easiest way to see how other people live, and that's building a ton of empathy.
For sure. And you all pull it, like you all do that and yet have written so different, like very different stories. And that's part of the fun to me. You know, there's a dash of magic in The Elephant's Girl, and you've got folklore going on in May Any Day, and then a little bit of that too in Kim's book. And just like culture and heritage are coming through, and so it fills sort of a same gap in very different ways. And I love how all of that could maybe speak to a different reader, open their eyes in a new way.
Yeah,
think a
maybe
lot
I
of
would add. Maybe I would add to that one of the scariest things about the readers that we're talking about in this age range is this feeling of isolation, and because everybody's having their own experience and feeling so out of control, that empathy is something that is asking a lot of somebody who's going through a tough time. That like stop thinking about your own suffering and think about other people's. That's a tall ask. But I think that one of the things that we are hoping for our readers, and for whether adults or kids, is that on the other side of extending that willingness to connect your heart to somebody else's heart, even though it feels like it might be overwhelming or scary to do, there's a feeling of not being alone. Is there waiting for you on the other side, and will strengthen the future risks that you take to reach out. It's scary to make contact. And if our books can help to entice people to reach out to others, then we've really served our readers well.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of it comes from writing from outside the majority culture, which it sounds like there's a lot of that in your books as well, whether it's culture, religion, or socioeconomically or whatnot. Is that I think Lin-Manuel Miranda said, you always feel like you're on the outside. When you're bicultural, it looks like you feel like you're on the outside looking in, no matter where you're at. The first part of my childhood I spent in Wyoming, and I was the only Latinx kid. And then we moved to New Mexico, and I was surrounded by Latinx culture, but I present as white. So then I was the only white kid, and I had all of my friends were Navajo and Mexican. And so it didn't matter where I was until later on in high school. I was always the outsider. And I think when you feel like that, it gives you kind of more insight into other people and the way that they're struggling to kind of find their norm. And that it lends itself to being a reader and a writer, I think.
For sure. In the chat, there was one question that came up, kind of noting how you all have incorporated a really incredible amount of diversity into your stories. And they were curious whether or not that was just sort of an organic thing, or was it a conscious decision to add those into the mix? So just how did you each approach that?
For me, the diversity in my story, I think, was organic. I drew a lot upon some personal experiences. Of course, the story is not autobiographical, but I drew a lot upon places I've lived and people that I know. And I definitely reached out to some friends and neighbors whose cultural backgrounds are different from mine, and asked a lot of questions, asked if they'd be willing to share stories and experiences about their family and childhood and growing up in multicultural families. So I think for me, it was organic. It just kind of grew as I wrote the story and thought about what would this zoo look like and who would be there, and all of the people who work in the zoo, and where did they come from, and what are their stories. And it became a really fun and exciting experience to create these characters and to really dive into who they are and what makes them unique and what makes them bring such a richness to this world that my character lives in.
Yes.
And for me, I don't know if Well, it's a little bit of both. One of my main lenses in how I see the world is as a Filipina American. And even if I didn't want to write from that lens, it's just the lens that I have. And so it comes out in everything that I write and create, whether it's my books or personal essay or nonfiction. So I am very conscious of that when I'm writing books, because as a kid, I was a huge bookworm, but there was zero representation of my family and my heritage and my culture. Even in historical fiction, it was just something that I never saw. And so when I began my journey as a middle grade author, I was very conscious of that, because I wanted to write a book that my boys could see themselves in. So my first book, I'm just going to show it because we're all here. The house that Lou built is definitely, it's a love letter to my culture. And so is this book as well. And again, you know, we're talking about windows and mirrors, and I love for readers to have those windows into what I remember and what I love about growing up and my childhood as a Filipina.
I think it's the same for me too. It was very organic. A lot of it comes from my own life. And the most realistic things were the things that I kind of struggled with. Like the grandma's kitchen is based on my aunt's kitchen in the book. And then I thought, am I serving the story if I put in these realistic details, or am I just doing this for my own? Like, it was like a love letter. There are a lot of Easter eggs in this story that are just little nods to people and things that I love about the world. And so I wanted it to be realistic, but I wanted it to work with the story, and I tried to find the balance with that.
Great. Very good. Okay. There's another one in the chat that caught my eye. Just as to, I think most of you, if not all, have kids of your own. Yes?
Yes.
What all are you finding that they, like, what books have they really connected with? Because, and like their general age, but what are they reading and responding to from those books?
Can you just repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, just like what books are your kids loving themselves? You know, it's one thing to get the adult perspective and the reviewer and like pointing out all these great things in books, but like, what are the kids saying? What are they into?
My daughter reads a lot of graphic novels.
Oh, yes.
My kids are 13 and 17.
Oh, okay.
And my daughter loves graphic novels. So she reads a lot of those, and she's starting to move out of middle grade, and I'm still trying to push it on her. I'm like, this is really good. I'm like, we should have more kids so I could have more middle grade readers in that. Yeah, so she's in that in between. It's a little bit tricky to find books for her right now because she is in that kind of in between area where she kind of goes back and forth between YA and middle grade. She just read the Hunger Games series and she really liked that. And she liked a lot of ghost stories. She liked Small Spaces by Catherine Arden, which is weird because it's a really spooky story, but that's her comfort read that she goes back to when she's sick or anything. And then my son, my 17-year-old, he likes action and adventure things, and he's been reading a lot of Michael Crichton because I guess the world's not as exciting enough for him right now. So he's reading books about pandemics and outbreaks, and so I don't know. That's what they're reading.
That's great. You can glean some lessons from those pandemic books.
You never know what they want. We're like, maybe they'll want soothing books. No, not my kids.
That's funny, Kim, because there's a lot of similarities in my house too. I have a 14-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter. And my 14-year-old son has really gotten into graphic novels. He definitely looks for humor stories. And I was just thinking as you were talking that he also loves Michael Crichton. He keeps going back and forth between middle grade novels I'm pushing at him, and then he goes to Jurassic Park. So it's kind of a in-between stage for him, but he is really loving graphic novels. He loves stories about kids with special powers and dragons and fantasy, but he also loves the, adventure. And then my daughter, who's 19, has gone through various phases of middle grade YA, but she still loves reading middle grade stories with a lot of hope, like what we're talking about. She likes magical realism, she likes light fantasy, contemporary, and has since she was young. So she's kind of maintained her reading style, I think.
Nice.
My boys, they're 10 and they're 12, and it's interesting how even when you're young, you definitely have your comfort reads and you know what your heart loves. Because my 12-year-old, he started to read a little bit older and some YA, like we read the Hunger Games together, but during quarantine he's been reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is what he read a long time ago, and he used to read those books all the time. And I was a little sad once they went back on his bookshelf, and he started reading older, because I thought, oh, this is a segue into a new time, a new kind of reading in his life. But lately I've seen him taking those out of the bookshelf and reading them again. And I thought, oh, that's like such a comfort move. We all have those books that just speak to us and that feel good when we read them. So, but my books, I'm sorry, my boys, like your kids, they love graphic novels. We also, my husband is a visual artist, so we still read a lot of picture books together. We study the art and just like the poetry of the words, although we haven't been able to go to the library, so we haven't done that in a while.
Right.
We have been ordering books, which is fun. And I think we've been ordering more than we can read. I just read, we just got Stand Up Yummy Chung.
Oh, that's on my list. Yeah.
Yes, I just got that too.
It's so good. And Prairie Lotus, the
Linda Sue Park, yeah.
We're excited about that one too. And Ephraim Divided, which is fantastic. I read an arc of that. I'm looking forward to the finished book. There's so many good middle grade books right now. I think kids have it so fortunate. There's so much.
I know.
Fantastic.
The only thing I might add to this is my wife and I have a 2-year-old, so she's reading at a slightly different level than the books that we're talking about. I know right now she's not into what she calls feminist baby. She's not into feminist baby right now, but I did buy a copy of a book that I loved growing up. It happens to be What Ernie and Bert Did on Their Summer Vacation, which actually has stood up over time as a quality literary experience. But the thing that I love about it is that I want her to experience the joy of reading. I think that's something that all of us as parents and teachers and writers want. And we look at the words and we make up pictures as we go along. So I'm just kind of having this experience of seeing the love of reading, bloom in her. And also there's something really special. I'm sure that all the rest of you have experienced this also, where you see your children's relationship with your book. Like you have a relationship with your book and you have a relationship with your children, but your children have a relationship with your book. Like they have seen it, they've held it, maybe they've read it. My daughter hasn't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to my daughter being the age that your children are, when she'll be able to open it and get an insight into what her father, put together. I just find that like so powerful. I can barely put words to it.
Aww.
I'm excited for you to have that experience, Evan. It was definitely special for me when my kids connected with my book. And I told them from the beginning, you're not obligated to read mom's books, but if you want to, you can. And I made sure that they each had an arc to read when I got the arcs. But having them connect with my books and be excited about them has been so rewarding. And you mentioned Bert and Ernie, yes? I wondered if you've introduced her to the monster at the end of this book with Grover. That was my favorite book when I was little.
Yes. We broke down the fourth wall early on. She's reading postmodern from the get-go.
Oh, that's great. Another one from our attendees is, what is the most important lesson from each of your books?
Ooh.
That's
I don't know if it's a lesson so much as just, I try not to be too didactic, but just, you know, that you can get through anything. Most of the kids aren't going to get bit by a bear, but they're all going to have hard stuff. And we're so resilient. And there's a tardigrades water bears analogy in my book because they can survive anything. Those little microorganisms, they can go to space. And I wanted to kind of draw a parallel with us and them, that some of the kids that read the book, some of them will have to go through really horrible stuff and they'll be able to get through it.
I'll jump in. So there's two like taglines that I've seen in different print things for Turtle Boy, and I think that they cover it because they're clear, but they're also open-ended. The first one is life is hard inside a shell. We all know that when you live in a shell, which we all do to some extent. Life is hard there, but then like the second half of that is life is too short to live in a shell. And we have one opportunity in these lives to do the impossible thing and to make contact outside of our world, outside of our pain, outside of our experiences, outside of even of the things that we're happy with, and to make contact with people who are coming through life with a different experience, and to say yes to something that up until now you've always said no to. So I would say that the book's lesson, and the one that I would love to send back in time to 13-year-old me and to my 13-year-old readers, is find some way to reach out of your shell.
I think for me, oh, sorry, Celesta, do you want to?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, like Kim was saying, I don't think I try to be consciously didactic when I'm, writing the books, but I find that when I'm writing, the question that I'm always exploring is, what is a home, or what is home? And I think when kids read Any Day with You, one thing that I hope is that they'll ask those questions for themselves and realize that home can be anywhere, and your family and your friends can be far away, but you still have their stories and you still have them within you. So definitely, I think home is a prevalent theme in what I write.
And with mine, with The Elephant's Girl, I definitely just started out to write a adventure about a girl who lives in a zoo who loves an elephant. But what ended up happening is that she asks a lot of questions of herself. And one statement she makes in the book is, it's possible to miss people you can't remember. So I think that as I wrote the story, what really came out as sort of the natural message that came out for Lexington was that you can make a family and a home anywhere where you make it with love, that there are people to be found who will love you, that also that memory and connection with people we can't remember is also a very important part of who you are. And and I think also the message that your past does not define you, and that home and family can be found.
Wow.
Oh, that's all beautiful. And I think it's actually a perfect note to end on, unless you guys had any last comments you wanted to say. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe I'll offer that, during these times that a lot of kids are looking for stuff to do over the summer and for different things to do. So I'm fortunate to have had a chance to work with Pardes on a curriculum for Turtle Boy, and would just like to encourage, if anybody would like to see it, I have more information on that.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, all of you, for all of these great conversations and for the wonderful stories you have put out there for us and to get us through quarantine. Let's give it up for Kim, Mae, Celesta, and Evan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, certificate of completion, and video recording. And for more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars. where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the Booklist Reader, where Booklist contributors post daily about all things books and library land. And did you know that Booklist content is freely available until further notice? Start reading with our digital edition, a format that pairs the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com. If you're interested in subscribing, you can take advantage of this special webinar offer to get print, online, digital, and archive access to Booklist for only $99. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more thank you to our sponsor, Random House Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar.